close your eyes for just a second and picture yourself standing on a hill above the water where two continents meet. In front of you is a city with walls so thick, people swear only gods could have built them. Watchtowers catching the first light of dawn. Treasure flowing in like a tide. A city so rich, so strategic, so untouchable, that its very existence was enough to make the ancient world bleed. You think you know the story of Troy, right? A beautiful woman, a lovesick prince, a siege, a wooden horse. But that's the easy version. The truth, if we can even call it truth, after 3,000 years of legend, is darker. Because this war didn't begin with love. It began with an insult, a golden apple, and one choice made by a young man who had no idea he was signing the death warrant of an entire civilization. And here's what Hollywood never really shows you. There were no winners in this war, only survivors, and not many of those. The greatest heroes didn't die like heroes. They died because of ego, because of oaths, because of pride, because of honor codes that turned peace into humiliation. Troy didn't fall because its walls were weak. Troy fell because people couldn't admit they were wrong. Tonight, we're going past the movie version and into what got cut. The prophecies, the gods, 10 years of hunger and plague, the women who paid for men's decisions, and the final moment when the man who killed your son becomes the only person who can give your son's body back. If you think this is just a myth, stay with me, because Troy isn't just a story. It's a pattern, and it's still repeating. And if you're new here, welcome to the Unspoken History, the place where we peel back the layers of myth, the clean versions, and the polished retellings until we hit what history always tries to hide. The real cost of power, honor, and choices that seem small, right up until they burn a world down. On this channel, we don't tell stories like good guys versus bad guys, because real life doesn't work like that. We tell them the way the ancients understood the world, a place where an oath can kill, where honor matters more than survival, where one decision made at a banquet can set an entire city on fire years later, miles away. On a battlefield, no one can escape. You'll hear names like Achilles, Hector, Helen, but don't rush to treat them like main characters. In this story, everyone is a link in the chain, a piece on the board. A person being pulled by something bigger than themselves, expectation, tradition, pride, and the fear of being seen as weak. And here's the most frightening part. It's not when people don't know what they're doing. It's when they do know, and they do it anyway. Because sometimes what keeps a war alive isn't the original reason. It's the shame of stopping. So before we step into Troy, before the clash of bronze, before those walls glow red in the night, let's go back to where the tragedy actually begins. Not the beach, not the ships, not Helen, but a wedding, a feast among the gods, where everyone is invited, except one. And you already know how this goes. In Greek myth, you can forget almost anyone, except the one who represents chaos. Her name is Eris, the goddess of discord. Eris doesn't need a sword. She doesn't need to scream. She only needs to do one quiet thing. She walks into the celebration, through the music and the wine, and she tosses something onto the floor, a golden apple. And carved into it are 3 simple words: to the fairest. That's it. A short sentence. A temptation. A trap. Because instantly, 3 goddesses rise to claim it. Hera, power. Athena, war and wisdom. Aphrodite, love and beauty. All 3 want the apple, and whoever judges between them will make 2 immortal enemies. The gods look at each other. silence. No one wants that burden. So Zeus does what powerful rulers often do when the risk is too high. He passes it to someone else. He says, "Let a mortal decide." And so they choose a young man, alone on Mount Ida, watching his sheep. His name is Paris. Paris doesn't understand that the moment those three goddesses appear before him, his old life is over, and something darker begins. Because Paris thinks he's just an ordinary man being toyed with by divine forces. But he isn't ordinary. He's a prince of Troy, a child who was once abandoned to die because of a prophecy. This boy will burn Troy to the ground, and this is where the real tragedy shows its face. The harder you try to escape fate, the faster you run straight into it. Right now, on that mountain, in a moment that feels private and small, Paris is about to make a choice that will lead to 10 years of siege, thousands of deaths, and the ashes of two civilizations. So lower your voice for a second. Step into the wedding where one goddess wasn't invited. And let's begin where everything truly starts. Close your eyes for a second. Not the Hollywood kind of close your eyes, the kind where the world goes quiet, and you can almost hear the distant water. Now, picture a city on a ridge above a narrow passage of sea, a choke point where continents feel like they're leaning toward each other. The wind tastes like salt and smoke. The sun hits stone walls so thick they look impossible, like the work of giants or a civilization that had something to prove. This isn't the Troy of perfect hair and clean armor. This is a Troy that feels real enough to fear. A place so wealthy, so strategically placed, that even if Helen had never existed, somebody would have found another reason to come for it. Because some cities aren't just cities, they're keys. And the moment the world realizes you're holding the key, the world starts testing your grip. Most of what we think we know about Troy comes wrapped in poetry. Stories passed through mouths before they were ever trapped on paper. And under those stories, there's archaeology. Burned layers, rebuilt layers, broken pottery, arrowheads, walls that really do rise out of the earth at the right place, like history refusing to stay buried. But the version most people carry around today, the version packaged into a 2-hour movie, has to do what movies always do. It trims the slow terror. It shaves off the years. It removes the sense that this war wasn't a single conflict. It was a machine fed by pride, trade, family curses, and the ancient belief that fate wasn't a metaphor. Fate was a law. So tonight, we're not retelling a romance. We're rebuilding the context the film couldn't afford. Because the Trojan War, at least in the ancient imagination, wasn't about one man stealing one woman and paying for it. It was about how a whole generation can get trapped inside a story that began long before they were born and ends long after they're dead. The movie gives you names you recognize: Achilles, Hector, Paris, Helen, a siege, a horse. But it doesn't give you what made those names radioactive. It doesn't give you the way the Greeks understood war, not as a contest of strategy alone, but as a collision between human choice and invisible forces, gods, curses, prophecies, the pressure of honor, the gravitational pull of reputation. In that world, you don't just walk away from an insult, you don't just compromise your pride, because pride wasn't a personality trait, it was currency, it was survival. It was how the world decided whether you mattered, and when that currency gets threatened, men choose death over humiliation. Entire cities choose fire over submission. Not because it's reasonable, because it's required. This is why the Trojan War becomes bigger than a battlefield. It's the end of an era. a collapsing of the heroic age, a warning disguised as entertainment. And if you want to understand it, you don't start with the horse. You start with something smaller, something petty, something cosmic, a party, a wedding, a room full of gods who think they're above consequences, until one excluded guest reminds them that even immortals have weak spots. So here's where it truly begins. There's a wedding, one of those mythic weddings where the guest list is basically the universe. Gods and goddesses show up like royalty. There's music, wine, a sense that nothing can go wrong because, for once, everyone important is smiling. Everyone important, except one, Eris, discord, the kind of presence you don't invite because her very name is a prophecy. And when she arrives uninvited, she doesn't scream. She doesn't curse. She doesn't throw thunderbolts. She does something worse. She throws an object so small it could fit in your palm. And it detonates a civilization. A golden apple. On it, a simple message. To the fairest. And immediately, the room tightens. Because 3 goddesses claim it. Not minor deities, not background characters. Hera, the queen of heaven. Athena, the mind of war itself. Aphrodite, the force that makes reason collapse. And now the problem isn't beauty. The problem is that whoever loses doesn't just lose an argument. They lose face. And in a world ruled by honor, losing face creates wars, even among gods. So Zeus does what powerful leaders often do when they don't want to get their hands dirty. He pushes the choice onto someone weaker, a mortal, a shepherd on a mountain, a young man who doesn't yet understand the weight of being noticed by the divine. His name is Paris. And the moment he's chosen, the gears start turning. Because Paris isn't just a random shepherd. He's the spark walking around in human skin. And Troy is the tinder. Paris is up on Mount Ida when the gods find him. And that detail matters. Because in these stories, mountains aren't just scenery. Mountains are thresholds. Places where the human world gets thin enough for something older to press through. He's alone with his flock, living a life so small and quiet, it almost feels like safety. And then the air changes. 3 figures appear, so bright the world seems dim beside them. Power in human shape. Beauty that doesn't ask permission, it commands. And a mortal is told to judge them. Think about the cruelty of that for a moment. Because this isn't really a choice. It's a trap dressed up as a compliment. A young man forced to decide which divine ego deserves a crown, knowing that 2 of them will walk away humiliated, and humiliation among immortals doesn't fade. It ferments. Paris can't refuse. No one can refuse Olympians and stay intact. But the goddesses don't rely on beauty alone. They do what every power structure does when it wants an outcome. They offer incentives, bribes. Hera steps forward first, regole and cold, like authority made flesh. Choose me, she says, and I will make you ruler over Europe and Asia. Political power so absolute it swallows borders. You'll be the kind of king other kings kneel to. Athena follows, sharp-eyed, calm, terrifying in her clarity. Choose me, and I'll give you victory. Not just strength, but skill. The mind that wins wars before they start. You'll become the greatest warrior, the greatest strategist, the kind of man poets can't stop praising even centuries later. And then Aphrodite. Soft, luminous, dangerous, precisely because she looks gentle. Choose me, and I'll give you the most beautiful woman in the world. Helen of Sparta. And if you've grown up human, if you've grown up young, if your heart has ever mistaken desire for destiny, you can feel the outcome forming before he even speaks. Paris chooses Aphrodite, not because he's evil, not because he's stupid, because he's human. And because love, real or manufactured, has a way of feeling like the only thing that matters when you haven't yet lived long enough to see what it costs. But here's what the movie rushes past. Paris isn't a shepherd, not truly. He's a prince, a Trojan prince, son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba, born into a palace, not a pasture. And he was supposed to die as a baby. Because before Paris ever took a breath, Troy's future was already screaming. Hecuba, his mother, dreams she gives birth to a flaming torch. And that torch doesn't just burn in her arms. It turns outward. It ignites Troy, the city itself, swallowed by fire. In Greek myth, dreams like that aren't psychological symbolism. They're warning shots. The seers interpret it plainly. This child will destroy the city. So Priam does what rulers do when the cost of mercy looks too high. He orders the infant taken to Mount Ida and left to die, exposed, abandoned, a sacrifice not to a god, but to fear. And in the ancient Greek mind, this is the moment fate smiles, because nothing guarantees destiny like trying to outrun it. A shepherd finds the baby, raises him, gives him a life with no crown, no politics, no prophecy stamped onto his forehead. And Paris grows into the kind of young man who feels like a gift, handsome, charming, persuasive. The kind of person who can walk into a room and make people forget why they were angry. Which is exactly the problem. Because when he eventually returns to Troy, recognized, welcomed back into the royal family, Priam and Hecuba make a second choice, a more human one. They keep him. They tell themselves the prophecy must have been wrong, or misread, or already avoided. And you can almost hear the tragic logic. He's too gentle to be a torch. He's too beautiful to be a destroyer. That's what love says. That's what denial says. And denial is one of the most consistent forces in every war story ever told. Now, Paris is a prince with a promise from the goddess of love. And there's a final piece the film smooths into something romantic. Helen. In many ancient versions, Helen isn't simply swept away by a whirlwind of chemistry. Aphrodite intervenes. The goddess tilts the scale. She clouds judgment, inflames desire, bends the human heart in ways that make consent complicated. And that ambiguity follows Helen like a shadow for the rest of the story. Was she stolen? Did she run? Was she enchanted? Was she guilty? Ancient sources disagree, because the point isn't a courtroom verdict. The point is what happens next. Paris leaves Sparta with Helen. And to the ancient world, that isn't just adultery. It's a violation of something sacred, hospitality. Xenia, the law that says when you enter a man's home under his roof, you are protected, and you owe respect. Break that law, and you don't just offend the husband, you offend Zeus himself. And now Menelaus, Helen's husband, does what men in that world are trained to do when their status is publicly humiliated. He calls in the oath, because long before this moment, when Helen had countless suitors, her father forced them all to swear something binding. Whoever Helen chooses, everyone else will defend that marriage. So when Menelaus calls, kings and warriors across Greece are trapped by their own promise. And that is how a private scandal becomes a continental war. But here's the darker question. The one that turns Troy from romance to realpolitik. Was Helen truly the cause, or just the excuse? Because Troy sits on trade routes that feed empires, control the passage between seas, and you don't just collect tolls, you collect power. You decide who gets rich, who starves, who expands, who dies. Helen may have been the spark, But the kindling was already stacked, and now the match is lit. When Menelaus calls in the oath, Greece doesn't answer like a single nation. It answers like a crowd, a collection of kings who don't trust each other, who don't like each other, who've fought each other before, and will fight each other again. Men bound together not by unity, but by obligation, and the fear of what happens if you refuse. Because the oath isn't just a promise, it's a leash. Break it, and you become the man who dishonors the sacred word, the man other men no longer have to respect. In an honor culture, that's social death. Political death? Sometimes literal death. So the heroes gather, not because they're noble, because they're trapped. And at the center of that gathering stands a man who was never going to let this war pass him by. Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae, the most powerful ruler in Greece. The kind of man who doesn't just lead armies, he collects them. The movie makes him simple, greedy, brutal, power-hungry. But the ancient story makes him worse in a quieter way. Agamemnon isn't a cartoon villain. He's what happens when power becomes identity. When leadership isn't a responsibility, it's an entitlement. When backing down feels like humiliation. And that matters, because this war will not be destroyed only by Trojan spears. It will be destroyed by Greek pride. Agamemnon's authority holds the coalition together, but it also poisons it. Because every king who answers the call is still a king. Every leader still wants to be first. And Agamemnon isn't the boss in modern terms. He's first among equals. A commander held up by consent, not absolute rule. Which means every insult is political. Every decision is a test. And tests are how coalitions crack. But before any ship ever reaches Troy, the story gives us a warning. The war demands a price up front. The fleet gathers at Aulis. 1,000 ships crowd the shoreline like dark birds, ready to lift off. And then, nothing. No wind. The sea sits flat and dead, like it's refusing them passage. In the ancient mind, nature doesn't do that randomly. It's a sign. A prophet speaks, Calchas, the Greek seer, and he delivers the kind of message that turns a mission into a curse. The goddess Artemis is angry, and she wants blood. To sail to Troy, Agamemnon must sacrifice his own daughter, Iphigenia. Let that land. Because the Trojan War, in its original form, begins with a father choosing the war over his child. Agamemnon lies to his wife Clytemnestra. He lies to the girl. He sends for Iphigenia under the pretense of marriage. Some versions say to Achilles, the greatest warrior alive. And then he kills her to buy the wind. Some traditions soften it. Some say Artemis swaps the girl for a deer at the last moment. But even that version doesn't save Agamemnon, because the choice was still made. And choices like that don't vanish. They wait. They follow you home. That sacrifice is the first proof that this war doesn't just consume the enemy. It consumes its own leaders from the inside. Now, meet the men who step onto those ships. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, the clever one. Not the strongest, not the loudest, but the man whose mind keeps the whole expedition from collapsing into chaos. Odysseus doesn't want this war. In some stories, he tries to dodge it by pretending to be insane, plowing salt into his fields like a man who's lost his reason. They test him by putting his infant son in front of the plow. Odysseus swerves, and in that one reflex, fatherhood overriding performance, he's caught. So he goes. But he goes like a man who knows something the others don't. That victory doesn't always mean survival. Ajax the Great is there too. Huge, blunt, unbreakable in battle, a living fortress. The kind of warrior who believes the world is fair because strength should be rewarded. That belief will kill him later. Diomedes, the one the movie barely acknowledges, young, relentless, favored by Athena, capable of doing the impossible. In the Iliad, he fights like a man temporarily raised above mortality. He even wounds gods, not because he's stronger than them, but because the divine politics of this war occasionally turn humans into weapons. And then there's Achilles, the name that eclipses the rest. Not because he's the leader, because he's the blade. Achilles doesn't come to Troy for Menelaus. Not truly. He comes because he's been offered a choice that no human should ever have to make. Live a long, quiet life, forgotten, or die young, and be remembered forever. That's the economy of the heroic age. Fame is immortality. And Achilles chooses the only immortality available to a mortal. But notice what's happening. Before the first arrow flies, we already have a coalition held together by oaths and ego, a commander who sacrifices his child to keep control, a strategist who doesn't want to be there, a warrior who believes strength guarantees justice, a champion who is literally sailing toward his own prophesied death. This isn't an army marching toward glory. It's a funeral procession that doesn't know it yet. And the most dangerous part is that, on the surface, it probably felt righteous. A stolen queen, a violated oath, a mission that sounds like justice. But underneath, there's another current: trade routes, wealth, control. The quiet truth that war loves moral excuses the way fire loves dry wood. So the ships, finally, catch wind. They cut across the sea toward Troy, and Troy, high on its hill, walls bright in the sun, doesn't yet understand what's coming. Not just an invasion. A decade-long machine designed to grind the heroic age into dust. Troy doesn't fall because its walls are weak. It falls because its people are human. Because the tragedy of Troy, real or legendary, was never they weren't strong enough. It was that their strength made them confident enough to ignore the one thing that could have saved them: a hard choice. Inside those towering walls sits King Priam, a ruler the stories describe as wise, diplomatic, experienced, not a fool, not a coward, a man who rebuilt Troy after earlier destruction, who kept alliances across Asia Minor, who knew how to balance neighbors like weights on a scale. And yet, the war happens anyway. Why? Because Priam's fatal flaw isn't ignorance, it's mercy in the wrong moment. He had already tried to escape fate once, when Paris was born and the prophecy arrived like a knife. "Leave the child to die," the seers said. "He will burn Troy." Priam tried. He ordered it, and the child lived anyway. So when Paris returns years later, beautiful, persuasive, impossible to hate, Priam does what parents do when their own hearts become louder than their responsibilities. He welcomes him. He tells himself the prophecy was exaggerated, misread, or already avoided. And that is the moment Troy's fate locks into place. Because fate, in Greek tragedy, isn't a meteor that strikes at random. It's a road you keep walking, even after the sign says the bridge is out. Then Helen arrives. And this is where the story becomes darker than a love triangle. Because Helen isn't just a woman in a palace, she becomes a symbol that different people project onto. To Paris, she's reward, proof that the gods favored his choice. To Priam, she's a political disaster wrapped in impossible beauty. To Troy's citizens, she's both blessing and curse. A foreign queen whose presence promises prestige and danger. And to Hector, Troy's greatest warrior, Helen is a problem he can't solve. Because Hector, unlike Paris, isn't intoxicated by desire. He sees the math. He understands that keeping Helen is unjust, and that returning her might end the war before it devours the city. In several ancient tellings, Hector argues for giving her back, but he's overruled. By Paris, whose pride can't survive admitting he was wrong, and by Priam, who can't bear humiliating his son or undoing a choice already made. This is Troy's quiet death sentence: honor over wisdom. A city choosing to defend a mistake because admitting the mistake feels worse than suffering the consequences. And no one embodies this tragedy more than Cassandra. Cassandra is the nightmare of knowledge. Apollo gives her prophecy, then curses it. She can see what will happen, clearly, accurately, in detail. But no one will believe her. Imagine the psychological horror of that. You see the fire before the first spark. You see the bodies before the first spear. You see your father's palace in ruins, while everyone around you is still planning festivals. Cassandra warns them about Paris. Ignored. She warns them about Helen. Mocked. She warns them about the horse. Later, when it matters most. And by then, her curse has done its work. She's been labeled mad for so long that truth sounds like insanity. Cassandra represents something painfully modern. The person who's right too early. The person who can't convince anyone until the catastrophe makes belief unavoidable. When belief is useless. And this is where the Trojan War starts to feel less like myth and more like pattern. Because Troy doesn't lose only because Greeks are strong. It loses because Troy is divided against itself. Because Priam is a king, but he's also a father. Because Hector is honorable, but honor won't let him choose survival over duty. Because Paris is charming, but charm isn't leadership. Because the city is wealthy, and wealth creates the illusion that consequences can be bought off. Because their walls have held before, so they believe they'll hold forever. That illusion is the most dangerous thing a civilization can have. The belief that you're too established to collapse. And out at sea, the Greeks are coming, not as one unified force, but as a coalition held together by fear of dishonor and hunger for gain. A decade of siege is about to begin. Not weeks, not months, 10 years, 10 years of raids, starvation, plague, betrayals, heroes becoming less human day by day. And here's the twist the movie can't really show. Troy doesn't fight alone. It has allies, contingents from across the region. Warriors who come because Troy is powerful, because trade binds them, because resisting Greek expansion feels necessary. But in the ancient telling, Troy still ends up isolated at the worst moment. Alliances fray. Reinforcements arrive late. Political calculations shift. And as the war drags on, every year becomes a weight on the city's throat. This is the real siege. Not just soldiers at the gates, but time itself. And hovering above all of it, like a shadow that never moves, is the prophecy that started this story. Paris will burn Troy. Not might. Not could. Will. The tragedy is that everyone acts as if they have control, while moving step by step into the ending already written. The 2004 film Troy makes a clean, modern decision. It deletes the gods. No Athena stepping into battle. No Apollo sending plague. No Hera bribing and seducing her way through divine politics. Just humans, sweaty, ambitious, frightened, making choices that look like choices. And for a modern audience, that feels realistic. But here's the problem. To the ancient Greeks, removing the gods doesn't make the story more realistic. It makes the story incomprehensible. Because in their worldview, War wasn't just strategy and muscle. War was also the unseen. The way a spear slips at the wrong second. The way courage drains out of your body for no reason. The way a man survives 10 battles and then dies because his foot catches on a rock. To us, that's chance. To them, that was divine intervention, or fate moving through the world like a current you can't see. And once you restore the gods, the Trojan War stops being a simple conflict between Greece and Troy. It becomes a theological drama, a battlefield reflecting an argument happening on Olympus. Because the Olympians don't unite. They take sides like rival families at a wedding that's turning violent. Hera and Athena back the Greeks, still furious about Paris's judgment, not because they care about Menelaus's marriage, or justice, or the suffering of civilians, but because of something older and more dangerous than morality: status. In an honor culture, being publicly slighted isn't just insult. It's a wound that demands repayment, even for gods. Aphrodite backs Troy, specifically Paris, because she promised him Helen. And divine promises are not casual. If Aphrodite abandons him, she loses face. She becomes a goddess who can't deliver. So she protects Paris again and again, sometimes whisking him away mid-defeat, like a hand pulling a chess piece off the board before it's taken. Apollo backs Troy too. He's prophecy, plague, the arrow that arrives exactly where it shouldn't. In some traditions, he loves Troy. In others, he's entangled with its royal line through old favors and old grudges. Either way, he becomes the war's most terrifying reminder. You can do everything right and still be destroyed. Poseidon is complicated. He helped build Troy's walls long ago, then was cheated of payment by a Trojan king. So he has history with the city. Sometimes he helps the Greeks. Sometimes he stays neutral. Sometimes his help looks almost spiteful, like an old worker watching the building he built finally burn. Ares sides with Troy, but he's chaos more than strategy. Violent, loud, and frequently outplayed by Athena's cold intelligence. And Zeus? Zeus tries to stay above it, not because he's moral, because he's political. He has children on both sides. He has reasons to love Troy, reasons to favor Greeks. And above all, Zeus knows something every ruler eventually learns. Sometimes the outcome is already decided. So he navigates, delays, bargains, but doesn't fully stop the machine. Here's why this matters. When you remove the gods, you get a war where skill determines outcome. But the Iliad is not interested in a fair fight. It's interested in something darker. That human excellence is fragile. That bravery doesn't guarantee survival. That the universe doesn't reward virtue consistently. That sometimes the wrong man wins because a god leaned on the scale. You see it in the opening plague, the part most films either skip or rush. Agamemnon insults a priest of Apollo by refusing a ransom. Apollo doesn't punish Agamemnon alone. He punishes the entire army. 9 days of sickness. Bodies piling up. Men dying who never met the priest, never spoke to Apollo, never made the decision. To modern minds, it feels unfair. To ancient minds, it feels terrifyingly accurate. Leaders make one arrogant choice, and everyone beneath them pays. That's divine justice in these stories, not proportional, not humane, absolute. And the gods don't just punish. They manipulate. They whisper, they confuse, they create fog on the battlefield, literal and metaphorical. A warrior is winning, and suddenly panic hits him like a wave. His arm goes weak, his foot slips. A spear finds the only open gap in his armor. To the Greeks, that wasn't just bad luck. That was Athena withdrawing favor. That was Apollo turning his gaze away. That was Hera nudging a decision at the exact wrong moment, which leads to the most uncomfortable truth the Iliad keeps circling: free will exists, but it's fenced in. You can choose how you face what's coming. You can't always choose what's coming. Achilles is told his fate: die young with glory, or live long without it. He chooses glory. But ask yourself, how much of that choice is truly free? When a culture trains you from birth that being forgotten is worse than death. When your entire identity is built out of reputation? The gods in this story aren't only supernatural characters. They're the ancient language for forces we still live with. Ego and status pressure. Peer expectation. Pride that won't let leaders back down. Random chance in violence. The way one decision cascades into thousands of consequences. The Greeks personified those forces because it helped them tell the truth. War is never fully under human control. And when you restore the gods, you also restore the war's most chilling idea. Heroes don't survive because they're main characters. They survive because something bigger hasn't finished using them yet. Until the moment it has. And then, no armor, no skill, no love can save them. The Trojan War doesn't begin, in Homer's mind, with Helen. It doesn't begin with Paris. It doesn't begin with the ships or the beach or the first spear. It begins with a single word: wrath. Rage so corrosive it becomes a kind of weather, something you breathe in, something that spreads. The Iliad opens in the war's 10th year. 10 years of siege, 10 years of raids on nearby towns, 10 years of men growing older in armor, 10 years of homes fading into memory. By this point, the Greeks aren't fresh heroes anymore. They're a camp of exhausted predators living off plunder. And in that camp, honor is everything. Not honor like abstract morality. Honor like a scoreboard. Public recognition of worth. Who gets the best prizes? Who sits closest to the commander? Who is praised? Who is obeyed? That's what keeps the hierarchy stable. And stable hierarchies are the only thing holding this coalition together. So when the Greeks raid and distribute captives, those captives become symbols, tokens of status, proof you're valued. Agamemnon receives a woman named Chryseis. Achilles receives Briseis. To modern ears, it's monstrous, human beings treated like trophies. To the ancient war economy, it's standard. And the story doesn't ask you to approve of it. It asks you to understand what happens when a society makes status more important than humanity. Chryseis' father arrives at the Greek camp with ransom. He's not just a desperate parent, he's a priest of Apollo. He begs for his daughter back. The Greeks, as a crowd, want to accept, not because they're kind, but because they're afraid. You don't insult Apollo if you can avoid it. But Agamemnon refuses, because accepting would mean admitting a priest can pressure him. It would mean his authority can be negotiated, and that is intolerable. So he says no. And Apollo answers, not with negotiation, not with warnings, but with plague. Arrows of sickness falling into the camp, men burning with fever, bodies stacking up, horses sickening, the air turning rotten with death. 9 days. Then Achilles calls an assembly. This is important. Achilles isn't trying to save Agamemnon's reputation. He's trying to save the army. He demands the truth. A seer reveals what everyone already suspects. Apollo is punishing them for dishonoring his priest. Return the girl. Make amends. Agamemnon agrees, out loud in public, but he does it like a man being forced to kneel. He gives Chryseis back and immediately demands compensation. And here is the moment the war inside the Greek camp truly begins. Agamemnon decides his compensation will be Briseis, Achilles' prize. He doesn't do it because he needs Briseis. He does it because he needs to prove something. He needs to prove he can take from Achilles. He needs to remind the coalition who stands at the top. In a modern workplace, this would be petty politics. In the Iliad, it's a detonator. Because taking Achilles' prize isn't just theft. It's public humiliation. A declaration that Achilles' greatness doesn't matter if the commander can strip him like a servant. And Achilles has a choice that isn't really a choice. Accept it, and become lesser in the eyes of the entire army. Resist it, and fracture the coalition during a siege. His hand goes to his sword. For a heartbeat, the war almost ends before Troy even falls, because the Greeks might kill each other. Then Athena intervenes, not with force, with restraint. She grips Achilles by the hair, sometimes literal in the poem, sometimes metaphorical, and whispers, "Not yet." So Achilles does something worse than open rebellion. He withdraws. He refuses to fight. He takes his men, the Myrmidons, and he sits by the ships while Greeks go out to die. To modern ears, it can sound childish, sulking. But in the ancient logic, it's a strike, a demonstration of labor power, a refusal to let the system feed on him while denying his worth. Achilles says, in essence, "You want my strength? Then respect me. If you won't, then see what you are without me." And the Greeks learn quickly. Without Achilles, they start losing. Not a little, catastrophically. Hector pushes them back. Fires spread toward the ships. Men who were legends bleed like anyone else. Agamemnon panics. He offers apology. He offers treasure, cities, gold, even marriage alliances. A delegation is sent. Odysseus, Ajax, and Phoenix, Achilles' old mentor. They beg. They reason. They threaten. They appeal to friendship and duty. And Achilles refuses. This is where the Iliad becomes psychologically brutal. Because Achilles doesn't refuse because he's stubborn. He refuses because he's had an insight that makes him dangerous. He realizes glory doesn't protect you. He realizes the system that promises honor can steal it on a whim. He realizes he could die tomorrow and still be treated like dirt. So why fight? Why bleed? Why die for men who don't value you? That thought, once it enters an army, spreads like plague. And this is why Homer begins here. Not with the romance, with the moment the heroic code starts to collapse under its own weight. One insult, one power play, and suddenly thousands of lives are sliding toward disaster. Because honor culture works like this. It makes compromise feel like death. So people choose real death instead. There's a moment in the Iliad that feels like the whole war pauses to breathe. Not because the fighting stops forever, only because, for a few minutes, the poem lets you step inside the city that's being strangled. Hector returns to Troy. And he doesn't return like a man who expects to live. He returns like a man who needs to see his home one more time, just to remember what he's sacrificing. The movie gives you a version of this scene, tender, romantic, tragic. But in Homer, it's worse. Because in Homer, Hector isn't just a noble warrior. He's a noble warrior who understands the ending. He knows Troy will fall. He can feel it in the way the war has started to tilt, like a ship taking on water that everyone pretends isn't there. He goes first to the palace, then he goes to Paris, and this is where you see the fracture inside Troy. Because while men are dying at the walls, Paris is inside, beautiful, sheltered, wrapped in comfort. Hector confronts him, not with violence, with contempt, a brother calling another brother what he is, the cause of all this. Paris makes promises. Paris always makes promises. He'll go back out. He'll fight. He'll do his duty. And Helen is there too, caught between worlds, hated, desired, blamed, protected, cursed. In the poem, she speaks with self-loathing, like she's already a ghost walking among the living. She knows she's the excuse that launched the ships. She knows people look at her and see a funeral. Then Hector leaves, because he isn't there to argue with a man who won't change. He's there for something smaller and more devastating. He's there for Andromache, his wife. And when he finds her, she's not waiting in a quiet room like a supportive character. She's on the walls, watching the battle like someone watching a wave coming for their entire life. Because Andromache doesn't have the luxury of ideology. She doesn't care about honor. She cares about survival. And she has already lost almost everything. Achilles, years earlier, killed her father and her brothers. Her birth family is gone. Hector is what's left. Hector is her entire world compressed into one man. So when she sees him, she doesn't greet him like a hero. She begs him like a human being. She tells him what the war means for her in plain, brutal math. If you die, I become property. If you die, our son becomes a target. If you die, your name won't protect us. Nothing will. She says it openly. Stay inside. Fight from the walls. Don't go out there where Achilles can reach you. She isn't asking him to be less brave. She's asking him to be less devout to a culture that treats his death like currency. And Hector, this is what makes him tragic, doesn't dismiss her because he doesn't love her. He answers her because he does. He says, in essence, I know. I know Troy will fall. I know my father will die. I know my brothers will be slaughtered. And what torments me most isn't even that. It's the picture in my mind of you, in chains, in a Greek household, forced to work another woman's loom while people point at you and say, that was Hector's wife. He can see her future. He can imagine it in detail. And then he says the sentence that defines Greek tragedy. But I cannot choose differently. Not because he lacks imagination, because he lacks permission. He says he would feel shame, public, unbearable shame, if he shrank back from battle. He's trained from birth that a man is measured by where he stands when the fighting closes in, and he's learned to stand in the front. That training has become his identity. So even though he loves his wife, even though he understands the consequences, he can't step outside the role his culture carved into him. This is the unbearable truth of Hector. He is a good man, trapped inside a system that will punish goodness. Then comes the child, their son, Astyanax. And it's one of the most quietly heartbreaking images in the epic. The baby is frightened of Hector's helmet, the plume, the bronze face of war. He cries, reaching for his mother. Hector laughs, softly, because even in this doomed world, fathers still try to make their children smile. He takes off the helmet, he holds his son, and he prays, not for peace, not for survival. He prays that his boy will grow up to be even greater than him, stronger, more glorious, the kind of warrior men will praise, and the audience, then and now, feels the knife twist. Because we know what's coming. Astyanax will not grow up. When Troy falls, the Greeks will throw him from the walls. A child murdered not for what he's done, but for what he might become. That's how fear works in war. That's how victory protects itself. Hector hands the baby back to Andromache. And Homer gives you an image that lingers longer than any battle scene. She smiles through tears. Not because she's hopeful, because she's trying to be brave for him. Because sometimes love looks like letting someone walk into death without making them carry your panic too. And then Hector leaves. He goes back toward the walls, back toward duty, back toward the role he can't escape. And in the poem, his household begins mourning him while he's still alive. Because everyone can feel it. The war has reached the point where the city isn't just fighting the Greeks, it's fighting the shape of the ending. This is what the movie can't fully carry. On screen, it's a touching goodbye. In Homer, it's the theme made flesh. What good is honor if it makes your wife a slave? What good is glory if it kills your child? What does it mean to be a hero if heroism guarantees the people you love will suffer most? And the Iliad doesn't answer. It just forces you to watch. If Achilles is the blade, Patroclus is the hand that keeps it human. That's the balance. That's why his death doesn't just change the plot. It changes the temperature of the entire story. Up to this point, Achilles' rage is political, personal, a protest against humiliation, a refusal to be used. But once Patroclus dies, rage becomes something else. It becomes grief with teeth. Patroclus isn't just a friend in the modern, casual sense. The Iliad calls him Achilles' companion, his closest one, the person who has shared his tent, his meals, his silence, his past. Some ancient voices interpret them as lovers, others as brothers in arms bound deeper than romance. Either way, Patroclus is the person Achilles loves most, and what makes it tragic is this. Patroclus is the one person in the Greek camp who still cares about other people's suffering more than his own pride. While Achilles sits by the ships, the Greeks are dying. The best leaders are wounded. The lines are breaking. The Trojans are pressing into the camp itself. The ships, the only way home, are about to burn. Patroclus can hear it. The screams, the panic, the sound of men dying close enough to smell. He goes to Achilles, and he doesn't speak like a diplomat. He speaks like someone who can't bear watching the world collapse while they still have the power to stop it. He begs, not for glory, for mercy, for action. He says, in essence, if you won't fight, then let me. Let me wear your armor. Let me lead the Myrmidons. Let the Trojans think Achilles has returned. It will be enough to turn them back. It will save the ships. It will save the army. And Achilles agrees. But he agrees like a man trying to keep control of a fire. He gives Patroclus his armor, but not his full permission. He gives strict instructions. Push them away from the ships. Then come back. Don't chase them to the walls. Don't try to take Troy without me. Because that's not your fate. And there's something else under the warning. Something ugly and very human. Achilles doesn't want Patroclus to win too much glory wearing his skin. Because glory in this world is finite. If Patroclus shines, Achilles' shine dims. Even love has to breathe inside an honor culture. Even friendship has to negotiate status. So Patroclus puts on the armor, and the effect is immediate. The Trojans see Achilles' helmet, and panic hits them like a curse. They've been winning for days, pushing Greeks back, tasting victory. Now, suddenly, they believe the greatest killer alive has returned. They retreat. The tide flips, and Patroclus, gentle Patroclus, fights like he's been waiting his whole life to be this brave. He drives the Trojans away from the ships. He kills men who have names and futures and families. And then the battle does what battle always does. It intoxicates. It breaks promises. It makes the line between enough and too far disappear. Patroclus pursues. He forgets Achilles' warning. He starts to believe the armor makes him Achilles. He starts to believe he can end the war himself. And 3 times he charges toward the Trojan walls. 3 times Apollo pushes him back. Because in the ancient telling, the gods don't just watch, they enforce the script. Apollo speaks to him, essentially, "Stop. This city is not fated to fall to you, not even to Achilles." Patroclus charges a 4th time anyway, and Apollo stops being patient. The god strikes him from behind. Not a fair duel, not a heroic contest, a blow of divine force that empties Patroclus's body of clarity. His helmet falls, his spear breaks, his shield slips from his arm, the straps loosen. And suddenly, Patroclus stands on the battlefield, like a man waking from a dream, exposed, confused, mortal. A Trojan warrior named Euphorbus wounds him, not fatal yet, but enough to slow him, enough to mark him. And then Hector arrives. Hector sees him. Hector realizes, this isn't Achilles. This is someone wearing Achilles. And Hector kills him. He drives the spear into Patroclus, and the armor becomes a coffin. As Patroclus dies, he speaks the kind of words that feel like prophecy, because they are. He tells Hector, "You didn't truly kill me alone. Apollo struck me first. Euphorbus wounded me. You were third." And then he says the sentence that puts a shadow on Hector's spine. "Achilles will kill you." Hector dismisses it. He can't afford to believe it. He strips the armor from Patroclus's body, Achilles' armor, and puts it on, which is a victory, and also a death warrant, because now Hector is literally wearing the skin of the man who will destroy him. The fight over Patroclus's corpse becomes its own battle. Greeks and Trojans fight like animals over a body, because bodies are symbols. Recover it, and you preserve honor. Lose it, and you endure a kind of shame worse than death. Desecration, dogs, the denial of burial. Ajax and Menelaus defend Patroclus's body with desperate ferocity, and eventually they drag it back to the Greek camp. And then someone runs to Achilles with the news. Patroclus is dead. Homer describes Achilles' reaction like an earthquake in human form. At first, he freezes, like the words don't fit inside reality. Then he screams, a sound so raw, so unhuman, that it reaches his mother in the sea. He collapses into the dirt, covers himself with ash, tears his hair. His grief is violent enough that his own men fear he'll kill himself. This matters because it shows what rage really was underneath. Not pride, not ego. Achilles' rage was always fear of being diminished, fear of being powerless, fear of being treated as disposable. And now he's faced with the one loss no honor system can fix, no ransom can reverse, no apology can repair. Patroclus is gone. Achilles calls for death. He says it plainly, what is life now? His mother Thetis rises from the sea and warns him, if you return to battle to kill Hector, you will die soon after. That is your fate. And Achilles answers with the most chilling sentence in the epic, then let me die. Because grief has destroyed his future. He no longer wants glory. He wants revenge. And then he wants oblivion. This is the hinge. Before Patroclus dies, Achilles is a hero who refuses to fight. After Patroclus dies, Achilles becomes something else, a force of nature, a man with nothing to lose, a weapon that wants to break the world until the world breaks him back. After Patroclus dies, Achilles doesn't return to war like a man rejoining a fight. He returns like a storm stepping onto land. But first, he needs armor, because Hector stripped Patroclus's body and took Achilles' old set. And in Homer, that isn't just practical looting. It's symbolic theft. Hector is wearing Achilles' identity like a mask. So Thetis goes to Hephaestus, the divine smith, the god of fire and craft. And Homer does something strange here, something no movie dares to do when it's racing toward violence. He slows down. He spends an entire section describing the making of Achilles' new armor, especially the shield. Not because he got distracted, because the shield is the point. Hephaestus doesn't decorate it with trophies and monsters. He decorates it with life. 2 cities, one at peace, one at war, weddings, courts of justice, harvests, dancing, work, play, children, parents, the rhythm of ordinary existence. It's the entire human world, everything the war is about to erase. And that's why it matters, because Achilles is about to become the enemy of the life on his own shield. When he emerges wearing the new armor, he isn't beautiful. He's terrifying. Homer says he shines like the sun, and even the Greeks step back from him. Your champion should inspire comfort. Achilles inspires fear, because there's a difference between a warrior who wants to win and a warrior who wants to die, but not before he drags the world into the grave with him. He gathers the Greeks and makes peace with Agamemnon, almost casually. The insult that started the Iliad? It's nothing now. He even says something like, "I wish the girl had died before this. Then none of it would have happened." That line isn't cruelty toward Briseis so much as the numbness of grief. When you've lost the person you love most, everything else becomes dust. Agamemnon offers compensation: gold, horses, cities, marriage alliances. Achilles accepts like a man signing papers he'll never read, because he's not here for payment. He's here for Hector. The Greeks urge him to eat. A soldier needs strength. Achilles refuses. He says he'll eat when Hector is dead. Until then, killing is his nourishment. And in the Iliad, it doesn't feel metaphorical. He is no longer operating like a normal human being. Even his horses, immortal horses, begin to weep. One of them, gifted a voice for a single moment, warns Achilles, "We will save you today, but your death is near." And Achilles answers, "I know. I don't care." That's what makes him so dangerous. A man who believes he has no future is a man the world can't negotiate with. When Achilles hits the battlefield, it stops being war. It becomes slaughter. Trojans fall in heaps. Names vanish into blood. The line breaks. Fear spreads. He drives them toward the river Scamander and kills so many men that the river fills with bodies. The water runs red and thick, and the river itself, personified as a god, rises in fury. Because Achilles is polluting the natural order with death. The river tries to drown him, sending waves to swallow him like punishment. Think about that. Achilles is so violent that the environment fights back, and it takes a god, Hephaestus, sending fire, to save him. That's the scale Homer wants you to feel. Achilles has moved beyond human conflict. He's operating at the level where gods have to intervene just to keep reality from breaking. He meets Aeneas, son of Aphrodite, a Trojan hero with destiny attached to him. Achilles would kill him easily, but Poseidon intervenes and removes Aeneas from battle, because Aeneas is fated to survive. Not because he's better, because the story needs him later. This is the ancient worldview in its rawest form. Skill matters, but fate matters more. Achilles kills Hector's young brother, Polydorus. Hector sees it, and rage ignites inside him. He tries to charge Achilles then, tries to avenge blood with blood. Apollo hides Hector in mist. Not yet. Hector's death has an appointment. Even Achilles can't rush it. Achilles' grief keeps stripping away the last restraints of humanity. He stops taking prisoners. He stops accepting ransom. He kills men begging on their knees. He captures 12 Trojan youths alive, not to spare them, but to sacrifice them at Patroclus's funeral. Human beings turned into offerings. Grief has turned him primitive, religious, monstrous. The Trojans retreat behind their walls. And then Hector steps out alone. This is where Troy's tragedy concentrates into one man. Hector stands at the gates, waiting. His parents beg him to come back inside. Priam tears his hair, exposes his old chest, pleads like a man whose kingdom has shrunk to a single son. Hecuba bears the breast that nursed Hector, and begs him not to die where dogs will eat him. But Hector can't retreat. He's trapped too, by shame. He believes he made mistakes leading Troy to this brink. If he hides now, history will blame him as a coward who ruined the city. He considers negotiating, returning Helen, returning treasure, offering more. But he realizes the truth. Achilles isn't bargaining anymore. Achilles isn't human enough to bargain with. So Hector decides to fight, to die with honor. And then Achilles appears, and Hector runs. This is one of the most psychologically honest moments in ancient literature, because Hector isn't a fearless statue. He's a man, and when he sees death walking toward him, his body does what bodies do. It flees. 3 times he runs around the walls of Troy. 3 times Achilles follows. All of Troy watches. All of Greece watches. It's not just a chase, it's a public ritual where everyone knows the ending. Zeus watches from above and weighs their fates on golden scales. Hector's side sinks. The decree is made. Apollo withdraws. And then Athena appears to Hector disguised as his brother. She promises to fight beside him. Hector, relieved, stops running. He turns. He faces Achilles. They exchange words. Hector begs for a pact. Whoever wins, return the body for burial. Achilles answers with pure venom. There are no oaths between wolves and lambs. They fight. Hector's spear strikes Achilles' shield and bounces off. Hector turns, looking for his brother, and finds no one. Athena is gone. He realizes he has been tricked by the gods, and that realization is the final horror. Even his courage has been manipulated. Hector understands. This is his death. So he charges anyway. And Achilles, studying the armor he knows better than anyone, finds the gap at Hector's throat. He drives the spear through it. Hector falls, and Achilles begins the desecration. He ties Hector's body to his chariot. He drags it through the dirt in front of the walls. A hero turned into an object. A husband turned into a spectacle. A city forced to watch. And Andromache, at home, weaving, unaware, hears the screaming and runs to the walls just in time to see her future. Hector's corpse bouncing in the dust. Her life ending while she still breathes. This is Achilles unleashed. Not a hero, a horror. And the gods themselves start to look away. Because even divine politics has limits. Even Hera and Athena, who hate Troy, are disturbed. Achilles has gone too far. The war has made something it can't fully control. After Hector dies, you would expect the story to end the way war stories usually end. A climax, a victory, a clean emotional release. But Homer refuses, because the Iliad isn't about winning. It's about what violence does to the soul, and whether anything human survives after the rage burns through. For days, Achilles keeps dragging Hector's body around Patroclus's tomb. Not once, not twice, over and over. As if desecration can fill the whole grief carved into him. As if hurting Hector's corpse can somehow heal Patroclus's absence. It doesn't. It only deepens the emptiness. And even the gods begin to recoil. Apollo, who loved Hector, protests. He calls Achilles savage, shameful, beyond restraint. Zeus agrees, because even in this universe there are rules. There is a line, and Achilles has crossed it. So Zeus sends a message, not to Agamemnon, not to Odysseus. To Priam, Hector's father, king of Troy, an old man who has already watched too many sons die. The command is simple and impossible. Go to Achilles' tent, alone, at night. Bring ransom. Beg for your son's body. And Priam's family reacts the way any family would. They plead with him not to go, because this is insanity. Walking unarmed into the enemy camp, the camp of the man who killed your son and has been dragging his body like an animal for days. Achilles could kill Priam, humiliate him, use him as a message, turn the old king into just another corpse. But Priam doesn't care about safety anymore. That's the thing about grief. Eventually, you reach a point where your own survival feels like a technical detail. Your life becomes secondary to the one thing you still think you can fix. Hector's body must be buried. In their world, burial isn't sentimental, it's sacred. Without burial, the dead wander. Without burial, honor is unfinished. Without burial, a father becomes a man who failed his son even after death. So Priam loads a wagon with treasure, gold, cloth, bronze, enough wealth to make any warrior tremble. And he goes, through the dark, through silent rows of Greek tents, through a camp full of sleeping enemies. In the poem, Hermes, messenger god, guides him in disguise, because otherwise he would never make it. That detail matters. Even this mercy requires divine permission. Priam reaches Achilles' tent, and this is where the Iliad becomes something close to unbearable. Priam enters. Achilles is inside, eating with his men, and Priam does not stand like a king. He does not demand. He does not threaten. He collapses. He falls to his knees. And then he does the unthinkable. He kisses Achilles' hands, the hands that killed Hector, the hands still stained, symbolically, spiritually, with his son's blood. That gesture is not weakness, it is not submission, it is the most violent act of humility imaginable, a father swallowing every instinct for revenge, because love for the dead has become stronger than hatred for the living. Then Priam speaks. He doesn't talk about politics. He doesn't argue justice. He doesn't mention Helen. He goes straight for the one place Achilles is still vulnerable. Remember your own father. Priam tells Achilles that Peleus is old, like Priam is old. That Peleus may be surrounded by enemies with no son there to protect him. But at least Peleus knows Achilles is alive. At least he can still hope. Then Priam delivers the knife. I had 50 sons. Now most are dead, and the best of them, the one who defended Troy, the one who was everything to me, you killed him. For him I have come. Respect the gods. Think of your father. And then Priam says something that turns the room cold. I am more pitiable than any man alive. I have done what no other mortal has done. I have brought my lips to the hands of the man who killed my son. And Homer says, Achilles breaks. Not with rage, with memory, with a longing for his own father, Peleus, who will never see him again. Achilles takes Priam's hand and gently moves him aside, not to reject him, because both men are crying, and neither can bear the sight of the other crying. Priam weeps for Hector. Achilles weeps for Peleus, and for Patroclus. The war's two most powerful men in that moment aren't king and killer. They're just fathers, one who lost his son, one who knows he will never return home. Two men grieving the same shape of loss from opposite sides of the battlefield. This is the scene movies struggle to include because it isn't cinematic in a modern way. No sword fight, no triumph, just the quiet collapse of hatred into shared sorrow. And then Achilles speaks with a kind of exhausted wisdom that feels like the poem itself talking. He says, "The gods give humans suffering as their default condition. That joy and pain are distributed without fairness. That even the blessed are not protected from tragedy." He tells Priam something almost cruel, but true. Weeping won't bring him back. You have to endure. Because there is no other option. Priam refuses to sit. Hector's body is outside. He demands it back now. And for a moment, Achilles flares, because grief is still inside him like coals. But Zeus's command holds. So Achilles goes out, and he does something that feels like redemption and horror at once. He personally washes Hector's corpse. He anoints it. He wraps it in fine cloth. He lifts it onto the wagon himself. He does it away from Priam's eyes, because Achilles doesn't want the father to see how damaged the body is. He doesn't want Priam's grief to turn into rage. He doesn't trust himself if that happens. Then Achilles invites Priam to eat. Priam refuses at first. How can he eat when his son lies dead? But Achilles insists, and they share a meal in the enemy tent. A meal between men who, hours earlier, would have gladly watched each other die. Afterward, Achilles asks, "How long do you need for Hector's funeral?" Priam says, "Days to gather wood, a day for the burning, a day to raise the tomb." Achilles agrees to a truce. He will hold back the Greek army until the funeral is done. A pause in slaughter, because two grieving fathers shook hands in the dark. That's how the Iliad ends. Not with Troy falling, not with Achilles dying, with burial, with mourning, with the knowledge that more horror is coming. But for one night, the machinery of war slowed enough for humanity to speak. And that is what the 2004 film couldn't really capture. That the deepest power of the Trojan War story isn't spectacle. It's the moment the enemy becomes a person. The moment you recognize that the man you hate is also someone who has loved and lost. And that recognition doesn't undo the war, but it does something else. It reminds you what war is erasing. Most people assume the Iliad ends with Troy burning. It doesn't. It ends with Hector's funeral. Troy is still standing. Achilles is still alive. The war is still grinding on, like a machine that's already eaten too much to stop. The rest of the story, the parts movies love most, comes from other epics and later retellings, fragments, summaries, tragedies, Roman reworkings. The narrative survives like a shattered vase. We can rebuild the shape, even if we've lost some pieces. And what comes after the Iliad is not a heroic victory march. It's an escalation. Because once Hector is gone, Troy's heart is missing. But the war doesn't end. It simply searches for a new hinge to break. First come the reinforcements. In many traditions, the Amazons arrive, warriors from the edge of the known world, led by their queen, Penthesilea. She fights with a ferocity that briefly shocks the Greeks, like Troy has summoned its last mythic breath. Achilles kills her, and in some versions, only after she dies does he see her face clearly. Her youth, her courage, and a strange regret flickers. Too late. Always too late. Then an even more distant ally arrives. Memnon, prince of Ethiopia, son of the dawn goddess Eos. He's not just another warrior, he's Achilles' mirror. Another semi-divine hero with destiny in his veins. They fight. Achilles kills him too. Eos mourns her son so fiercely that her tears become the morning dew. It's a mythic way of saying this. Even the sky remembers the cost. But Achilles' own death is near. And here's what the myths emphasize almost cruelly. The greatest warrior who ever lived doesn't die in a glorious duel against an equal. He dies from an arrow. Shot by Paris, guided by Apollo. The shot strikes Achilles' one vulnerable spot, his heel. The details vary. Some traditions say Thetis dipped Achilles in the river Styx as a baby, making him invulnerable everywhere except where she held him. Others tell it differently, but the meaning stays consistent. Every hero has a weakness. One seam fate can find. And Achilles' weakness isn't just physical. It's that he cannot step out of the role his world wrote for him. He chose glory. Glory kills him. Achilles dies. And once again, the battlefield becomes a war over a body, because the corpse of a hero is itself a prize. Ajax and Odysseus fight to recover him. They bring him back. They honor him with funeral games and mourning. And then comes a contest that destroys another hero. The contest for Achilles' armor. Divine armor. Hephaestus made. Not just protection, but symbolism. The physical proof of Achilles' unmatched status. Ajax expects to receive it. He's the next greatest warrior. He defended Achilles' body. He embodies strength and straightforward courage. But the armor is awarded to Odysseus instead. Because the Greeks decide cleverness is more valuable than brute force. This decision is not just political. It's existential. It tells Ajax, your strength is not what the world values most. And in an honor culture, being told your defining trait is not enough is unbearable. Ajax breaks. Athena drives him mad. Again, divine manipulation in the ancient mind. So he sees livestock as enemies and slaughters them, thinking he's killing the Greek leaders who dishonored him. When sanity returns and he realizes he butchered sheep, not warriors, the shame is worse than death. So Ajax falls on his own sword. A hero ends himself because the culture of honor leaves no space for recovery, no space for embarrassment, no space for being second. The war continues, but now it becomes prophecy-driven. Because Troy isn't falling by force. The walls hold. So the Greeks start collecting conditions, like locks that must all be opened before destiny allows the city to collapse. They need Philoctetes, abandoned years earlier on an island with a festering wound, carrying Heracles' bow and arrows. A prophecy says Troy cannot be taken without that weapon. So Odysseus returns to retrieve him, begging help from the man the Greeks left to rot. Philoctetes comes back and, in many versions, kills Paris with a poisoned arrow. Paris, the man who started the war, dies not in noble combat, but from a wound that lingers. Then there's another condition, the Palladium, a sacred statue of Athena that protects Troy. As long as it remains inside the city, Troy is guarded by divine favor. So Odysseus and Diomedes sneak into Troy, disguised, crawling through darkness, and steal it. In many tellings, Helen recognizes them and does not betray them. That detail matters, because it suggests Helen, by this point, understands she wants the war to end, whatever her role was in starting it. Once the Palladium is gone, the city becomes vulnerable. But still, the Greeks can't storm the walls. So Odysseus does what the Iliad has been implying all along. He wins through mind, not muscle. The wooden horse, a hollow offering, big enough to tempt the Trojans, big enough to create a problem, big enough to feed their pride. The Greeks pretend to leave. They burn their camp. They sail away, then hide. The Trojans wake and see the beach empty. 10 years of terror suddenly looks like it's over. And this is where tragedy loves to strike. Not when you're strongest. When you relax. The horse stands outside the gates. Some Trojans argue to burn it. Others argue to destroy it. Cassandra screams, "It's a trap." No one believes her. Then the priest Laocoon warns them, "Beware Greeks bearing gifts," and throws a spear into the horse. In the myth, serpents rise from the sea and kill him and his sons. The Trojans interpret it as divine punishment for disrespecting a sacred offering. So they do the exact thing they should not do. They bring it inside. They widen their gates. They breach their own defenses to welcome what they think is a blessing. Then they celebrate. They drink. They sleep. And in the night, the Greeks hidden inside the horse emerge and open the gates from within. The Greek fleet returns, and the sack of Troy begins. This is not portrayed in the ancient tradition as a clean victory. It's portrayed as one of the darkest moments in myth. Old men murdered at altars, women dragged from sanctuaries, children thrown from walls, temples violated, the rules of war and the rules of the gods shattered in a single night. Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, kills Priam at an altar, in some versions after killing Priam's young son first. Astyanax, Hector's child, is thrown from the walls, because the Greeks cannot allow Hector's bloodline to survive, and someday seek revenge. Polyxena, Priam's daughter, is sacrificed at Achilles' tomb in some traditions, because even dead heroes still demand payment. The women are distributed as prizes. Andromache becomes Neoptolemus's captive. Cassandra becomes Agamemnon's. Hecuba becomes enslaved. And Troy burns. The city that seemed built by gods collapses in one night, not because the walls failed, but because the human mind wanted to believe the nightmare was finally over. And here's the final twist the movie hints at, but doesn't fully follow. The sack is so brutal, it offends the gods. Even Athena and Poseidon, who supported the Greeks, turn on them for violating temples and committing sacrilege. So the Greeks sail home thinking they've won, and step directly into the next layer of tragedy. Because Troy's fall isn't the end, it's the midpoint. The war doesn't stop destroying lives just because the city is ashes. It follows the victors home. The Greeks win. Troy burns. Helen is recovered. By the logic of honor culture, the story should close with celebration. Heroes returning home, welcomed like gods, rewarded for their suffering. But the ancient world doesn't give them that ending. Because in Greek imagination, victory doesn't cleanse guilt. It only makes your crimes louder. And the sack of Troy, the sheer brutality of it, crossed lines even the gods respected. Temples violated, supplicants murdered, sacred spaces defiled. So when the Greeks launch their ships and turn west toward home, they don't sail into peace. They sail into punishment. This is called nostos, the return home. It's where we get nostalgia, the ache for home. But for the Trojan War generation, nostos isn't sweet longing. It's a slow realization that home has become a stranger. And for many heroes, the sea becomes a grave. Ajax the Lesser is one of the first to pay. During the sack, he drags Cassandra from Athena's temple, violating sanctuary, humiliating a goddess in her own house. Athena demands vengeance. Poseidon answers. Ajax's ship is wrecked. He survives, clinging to a rock, breathing, bruised, stubbornly alive. And then he commits the classic fatal error of mythology. He boasts. He claims he escaped despite the god's will. Poseidon splits the rock and drowns him. A hero erased not by a spear, but by pride after survival. Menelaus and Helen, ironically the couple the war was supposedly fought for, don't get a clean return either. Storms drive them off course. Some traditions send them to Egypt. Years pass, 7 years in some tellings. And when they finally return to Sparta, they return wealthy, but hollow. Menelaus has won everything he wanted and still can't unsee the decade of corpses. Helen returns not as a triumphant queen, but as a controversy walking in human skin, some seeing her as victim of divine manipulation, others as willing destroyer. Even Home doesn't know what to do with her. Diomedes, one of the most effective Greek warriors, returns and discovers his house has rotted without him. His wife has taken a lover. In some versions, Aphrodite curses his home as revenge for Diomedes wounding her in battle. Diomedes, who fought brilliantly and survived the siege, ends up exiled, founding cities elsewhere like a refugee, to a man who conquered Troy and still loses his kingdom. Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, takes Andromache as his captive. He carries her back to Greece, and she bears him children. It's one of the bleakest ironies in the whole tradition. The widow of Hector forced into the household of the son of Hector's killer. But Neoptolemus doesn't keep his prize long. He is murdered, often connected to Apollo's sanctuary at Delphi, where violence committed in sacred space comes full circle. Even Achilles' line ends in blood. But the two most famous homecomings, the ones that define Greek tragedy, belong to Agamemnon and Odysseus, because they show two different kinds of aftermath. One is the home that becomes a trap. The other is the home you can't reach. Agamemnon returns first, and he returns like a man expecting applause. He's the commander, the victor, the king who brought down Troy. He brings Cassandra with him, prophetess and captive, a living reminder that he still sees war in terms of prizes. And he forgets what he left behind. Before the fleet ever sailed, he sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia for wind. His wife Clytemnestra never forgave him. While Agamemnon was gone, she took a lover, Aegisthus, who also has reasons to hate Agamemnon's bloodline. They don't just resent him, they prepare. So when Agamemnon arrives, they welcome him with ceremony. They offer him a bath, a moment of comfort, a moment of vulnerability, and they murder him. Some traditions say Clytemnestra throws a net over him, tangling him like an animal, then stabs him. Others say she uses an axe. Either way, the message is the same. The war's greatest leader survives 10 years at Troy and dies in his own house. Unarmed, betrayed. Cassandra, who foresaw all of it, dies beside him. She knows the murder is coming. She says so. No one believes her. Her curse follows her across the sea, and Clytemnestra justifies it as justice. You killed our daughter. You chose war over your child. Now you pay. But murder never ends at one murder. Agamemnon's son Orestes is then forced, by the ancient logic of vengeance, to avenge his father by killing his mother. He does, and he is driven mad by the Furies, hunted by divine forces for the crime of matricide. This is the curse of the house of Atreus. Violence breeding violence, children paying for parents, justice becoming indistinguishable from revenge. Agamemnon won Troy, and Troy still destroyed his house. Then there's Odysseus. If Agamemnon's tragedy is the home that becomes a slaughterhouse, Odysseus's tragedy is the road that never ends. He leaves Troy and tries to sail home, but he's already marked. He blinds the Cyclops Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, and then, in a moment of pride, he shouts his real name back at the monster. Polyphemus prays to his father, "Let Odysseus reach home late, alone, in misery. Let him find trouble in his house." The curse becomes the map. Odysseus wanders for 10 years. He loses men to monsters, storms, hunger, temptation, lotus eaters who erase memory, Circe who turns men into animals, sirens who sing sailors into death, Scylla and Charybdis, choices between two nightmares. His men die one by one until he is alone, washed ashore, stranded with Calypso for years, kept like a beautiful prisoner. Eventually, he returns. 20 years after leaving home, and home is not home anymore. His palace is filled with suitors, men eating his food, drinking his wine, pressuring Penelope to choose a new husband, plotting to kill his son, Telemachus. Penelope has held them off with her own cleverness, weaving by day, unraveling by night, buying time with a thread. Odysseus returns disguised as a beggar. Only his old dog recognizes him, and dies, and the homecoming ends in blood. Odysseus slaughters the suitors in his own hall, reclaims the house with violence, because war taught him only one language that works against men like that. So, what does Nostos reveal? That the Trojan War never truly ends. It just moves. It follows survivors into bedrooms, into marriages, into family lines. It turns houses into battlefields. It turns victory into emptiness. And it leaves one final truth hanging in the air. The Greeks destroyed Troy, and then discovered they could not return to the people they were before they destroyed it. Home was not a reward. Home was another test, and most of them failed it. One of the cruelest patterns in the Trojan War story is this. People don't stumble into disaster blind. They walk toward it with their eyes open. They're warned. They're shown. They're told, again and again, exactly what will happen. And it happens anyway. That's not a plot convenience. That's Greek tragedy. Because the Greeks believed fate didn't hide. Fate announced itself. And still, human nature marched forward like it couldn't do anything else. Start with Calchas, chief seer of the Greek expedition. He isn't a fringe mystic. He's brought for a reason. Because war without prophecy, in that world, is war without a map. Calchas predicts the war will last 10 years. He reveals the cause of Apollo's plague, Agamemnon's insult to the priest, and that revelation ignites the quarrel with Achilles. He declares conditions for victory. He's right. And the Greeks listen, just not early enough to avoid bloodshed. That's the pattern. Prophecy doesn't prevent consequences. It just explains them after they arrive. Then there's Thetis, Achilles' mother. She isn't a human prophet, but she has prophetic knowledge. She tells Achilles the truth before he sails. Two fates, long life, no glory, or short life, eternal fame. Achilles chooses short life. But think about the trap inside that choice. If you're raised in a culture where being forgotten is worse than dying, is it really freedom? Or is it the cultural equivalent of a gun held gently to your head? Thetis' knowledge doesn't save her son. It only gives her more time to mourn him while he still breathes. That's prophecy's special cruelty. It doesn't just reveal the end. It makes you live with the end approaching. Now look at Helen. In some versions, she senses what Paris will bring. In others, she's compelled by Aphrodite, desire made supernatural. But either way, Helen becomes a person who carries foreknowledge like an illness. At Troy, she sometimes behaves like someone who understands the story is already written. She recognizes Greek heroes in disguise. She does not betray them. She suspects the horse is not what it seems. And still, she remains. Whether that's choice, coercion, or fatalism depends on the telling, but the effect is the same. Helen's awareness doesn't change the machine. It only makes the machine feel darker. Then there's Helenus, Priam's son, a Trojan prophet. He knows conditions of Troy's fall. He knows the Greeks need specific things. Heracles' bow, the Palladium stolen, the city taken through trickery. You might think this knowledge could be used to prevent defeat. But prophecy isn't a roadblock. It's a rail track. Knowing the route doesn't let you step off it. It only lets you watch the train coming. Helenus survives by leaving. But survival is not victory. He lives, carrying the knowledge that being right did not save his city, his brothers, his father. And then there is Cassandra, the purest symbol of the prophet's curse. Apollo gives her prophecy, then curses her so no one believes her. Divine knowledge without human authority. Truth without trust. She sees Troy burning and cannot stop it. She warns her parents about Paris and is ignored. She warns them about Helen and is ignored. She warns them about the horse and is ignored. And then, when the horse opens and the massacre begins, Cassandra's punishment becomes complete. She was right, and it didn't matter. That's what makes Cassandra so unbearable. She doesn't just suffer the tragedy once, she suffers it twice. First in vision, then in reality. She lives the future in advance, helpless, then watches it unfold, still helpless. And when Troy falls, she runs to Athena's temple for sanctuary. Ajax the Lesser drags her out, violating the sacred space. Cassandra knew it would happen. She couldn't stop it. Then she's given to Agamemnon, and she tells him clearly that returning home means death. He doesn't believe her, or he believes her and thinks power will protect him. Either way, they return, and they are murdered. Cassandra dies exactly as she foresaw, still unheard. So why do these stories keep doing this? Why include prophecy at all if it changes nothing? Because the Trojan War isn't trying to tell you, look, magic. It's trying to tell you something about human behavior that remains painfully modern. We often know what we're doing to ourselves. We see patterns. We receive warnings. We watch consequences gather like storm clouds. And still we choose pride, appetite, denial, and short-term comfort over wisdom. Agamemnon knows insulting Achilles is dangerous. He does it anyway. Achilles knows withdrawing will kill Greeks. He does it anyway. Paris knows taking Helen will ignite war. He does it anyway. The Trojans know returning Helen could end the bloodshed. They don't do it. Prophecy, in Greek tragedy, isn't about predicting the future. It's about removing the excuse of ignorance. It proves the characters aren't destroyed by random bad luck. They are destroyed by the parts of themselves they refuse to change. And that's why the story still hits. Because we recognize it. We recognize the way people keep walking toward the cliff even while they're describing it. We recognize Cassandra in every ignored warning. We recognize Calchas in every expert dismissed until bodies pile up. We recognize Thetis in every parent who sees disaster coming and can't stop their child from choosing it. That's the prophet's tragedy. Awareness without agency. Truth without power. Knowledge that doesn't liberate, it only sharpens the pain. If you step back far enough from the battlefield, the Trojan War looks less like a conflict and more like a transition. Not just Troy falling, an entire age ending. That's why, in some traditions, the gods care so much. Not because they love Greeks or Trojans the way humans love nations, but because the heroic age, this era of demigods and superhuman warriors, has grown too loud, too crowded, too close to the divine. And in certain ancient tellings, Zeus has a plan, a dark plan. The earth is overpopulated with heroes, children of gods and mortals, men and women with strength and arrogance that almost blur the boundary between human and immortal. Too many semi-divine bloodlines, too many humans who can challenge gods, wound gods, refuse gods. The line between mortal and divine is thinning, so the Trojan War becomes, depending on the tradition, Zeus's solution. Gather the heroes in one place. Let them destroy each other. Reduce the demigod population. Restore the separation. It's culling, a controlled burn. And suddenly, the strange question, why so many legendary figures end up at the same war, has a terrifying answer. Because the war was designed as a gathering point, a funnel, a beautiful excuse to concentrate the most dangerous humans in one place and grind them down until the world is safe again. From that angle, the golden apple isn't just a petty argument. It's the spark used to light the pile. Hera and Athena's rage becomes useful fuel. Aphrodite's promise becomes the trigger. Paris becomes the match in human form. And the war becomes the kiln that bakes the heroic age into ash. But even if Zeus has grand strategy, individual gods still behave like themselves. Petty, emotional, political, obsessed with status. Hera's hatred is not just vanity, it's a cosmic insult. As queen of the gods, being declared less fair isn't a small slight, it's an assault on rank. Athena's resentment is similar, but also ideological. She favors ordered strategy over chaotic passion. Greeks, with their coalitions and tactical minds, align with her more than Troy does. Aphrodite supports Troy not because it's morally right, but because it's her domain, desire, beauty, the chaos of attraction. She promised Helen she can't retract without losing face. Apollo supports Troy partly out of affection, partly because prophecy itself is his territory. And the Trojan War is saturated with prophecies. He's less a cheerleader and more a manager of the narrative, ensuring what must happen, happens. Poseidon is torn between old resentment and old connection. He built Troy's walls, but was cheated by a Trojan king long ago. He remembers. He holds grudges like tides. Ares loves blood. He takes Troy's side, but he's repeatedly humiliated, outmaneuvered by Athena, wounded by mortals, empowered by divine favor. The war quietly teaches that pure violence is less effective than intelligence, and Zeus, again and again, tries to keep balance, not from fairness, but from fear of destabilizing divine order. Because there is something above even Zeus. Moira. Fate. The Fates, those three sisters who spin, measure, and cut the thread of life, rarely show up in the action. And that's the point. They don't need to. They are the structure. They are gravity. They don't argue. They don't bargain. They don't care if you're a king or a god. When their decree is set, the world bends. This is why Zeus cannot save Sarpedon, his own son, from death at Troy, even though he wants to. Hera warns him, if you break fate for your child, every god will demand the same for theirs. The entire order collapses, so Zeus watches his son die, powerless, not weak, constrained, which reveals the Greek universe at its bleakest. Even gods are not free. They can influence events. They can delay. They can manipulate. They cannot erase what is destined. So, what does that mean for mortals? It means the Trojan War is not ultimately about who is right. It's about how little control any side truly has once the machine starts. The gods fight, but they're also trapped. By pride, by promises, by status. by the rules of fate itself. Mortals fight, thinking they're choosing, but their choices are channeled through prophecies and divine pressure, and cultural honor codes so rigid they function like chains. This is why the Greeks didn't see the Trojan War as a simple story of heroes. They saw it as a demonstration that excellence doesn't protect you, that virtue doesn't guarantee reward, that power is not the same as freedom, that fate rules even the mighty. And if Zeus truly intended the war as a cleansing fire, then the outcome makes sense in mythic terms. After Troy, the heroic age fades. The demigods die out. The world becomes more ordinary. Gods step back, at least in the storytelling imagination. Less direct intervention, fewer miracles walking openly in daylight. The boundary is restored. The age of men becomes fully human, which is its own tragedy. Because what's being lost isn't just violence, it's wonder. The very same larger-than-life figures who make the age dangerous also make it luminous. And Troy is where that luminosity burns itself out. So the Trojan War becomes more than a myth about a city. It becomes the story of a world-changing state, a civilization collapsing, a generation erased, an era closing. And what remains is not triumph. It's aftermath, ash, survivors who realize too late that the values they worshipped, honor, pride, glory, were the very things that made them easy to destroy. When people say the Trojan War is just a myth, they usually mean it like a dismissal, as if myth is the opposite of truth. But myth isn't the opposite of truth. Myth is what a civilization tells itself when the truth is too big to fit into simple history. And the Trojan War, whether it happened exactly as described or not, has survived for 3,000 years, because it keeps describing the same human machinery, the same pattern. It begins with something small, a wedding, a slight, a choice made for pride. And then it expands, because the problem is never just the spark. It's the dry wood waiting for it. Troy is not destroyed by one love affair. It's destroyed by a chain of decisions that become impossible to reverse, because reversing them would require people to admit they were wrong. Paris cannot admit he shouldn't have taken Helen, because that would mean shame. Priam cannot undo it, because that would mean humiliating his son and acknowledging the prophecy's truth. Menelaus cannot accept it, because that would mean living with public insult. Agamemnon cannot treat Achilles as an equal, because that would mean sharing power. Achilles cannot bend, because bending would mean losing honor. Hector cannot stop fighting, because stopping would mean abandoning duty. Everyone sees the cliff. Everyone keeps walking. And that is why the Trojan War feels disturbingly modern. Because we still live inside honor cultures, maybe not in bronze armor, but in reputation economies. In institutions where saving face matters more than saving lives. In environments where leaders would rather double down than apologize. Where admitting mistake feels like weakness, even when the mistake is actively killing people. That's the first lesson Troy whispers from the ruins. Pride turns correction into humiliation. And humiliation turns correction into war. Second, the Trojan War is a story where everyone loses, even the victors. The Greeks destroy Troy, and then the gods punish them for the cruelty of their victory. They go home and find their homes changed or poisoned. Agamemnon wins the war and dies in a bathtub. Odysseus wins the war and spends 10 years being erased by the sea. Ajax wins battles and kills himself because he can't survive shame. Menelaus gets Helen back and still doesn't get his life back. It's the ancient world's way of saying, you can win a war, and still lose everything. Because war is not a transaction where suffering purchases peace. War is a fire. It spreads, and it never burns only what you intended. Third, fate in the Trojan War isn't just supernatural. It's psychological. Fate is the way people become trapped inside who they are. Achilles cannot stop being Achilles. Hector cannot stop being Hector. Agamemnon cannot stop needing dominance. Paris cannot stop needing desire. So, prophecy doesn't feel like magic. It feels like inevitability. The Greeks are telling you, most disasters don't happen because people don't know. They happen because people can't change. Fourth, and this is the harshest, women pay the highest price for men's codes. Helen becomes an object men fight over. Briseis and Chryseis become trophies. Cassandra becomes the symbol of truth ignored, then violated. Andromache becomes the proof that honor often means nothing to the people who are forced to live with its consequences. The men argue about glory. The women bury the dead. The men swear oaths. The women become prizes when oaths are enforced. The Trojan War shows you something many war stories try to soften. The battlefield isn't where war hurts most. War hurts most in the homes it empties, and in the bodies it turns into property. And finally, Troy tells you something that sounds bleak, but is actually a warning meant to save you. The real enemy is the system that makes violence feel necessary. Because the Iliad doesn't end with a victory parade. It ends with two fathers crying. Achilles and Priam, enemy and victim's father, sharing a moment so human it temporarily halts the war machine. And that's Homer's final note. Not triumph, not justice, recognition. The enemy is a person. And once you can see that, it becomes harder, just a little harder, to keep feeding the machine. So here's the way I'd end this video. If we're telling it like the real story, it is, Troy wasn't doomed because it lacked strength. It was doomed because strength made it arrogant, because pride made compromise impossible, because honor made admitting mistakes feel worse than death, because prophecy gave warning, and warning was treated like noise, and because once the machinery of violence starts turning, it creates its own logic. It demands more blood to justify the blood already spilled. That's the pattern. That's why Troy keeps returning in history under different names, different flags, different excuses, same engine. So the question Troy leaves you with isn't, who was right? It's this: what values do we worship that might one day burn us? What warnings are we ignoring because accepting them would require changing course? What conflicts are we prolonging because backing down feels like losing? And most importantly, what would it look like to end the story early? To return Helen in year one? To choose wisdom over pride? To choose peace before the machine becomes too large to stop? Because the Trojan War's final truth isn't that fate is unstoppable. It's that suffering is often chosen, one proud decision at a time, until it becomes destiny. And if we can learn anything from Troy, it's that the bravest act isn't always fighting. Sometimes the bravest act is refusing to let pride write the ending. If Troy is a pattern, where do you see it repeating today? In politics? In relationships? In nations? In ourselves? Drop a comment with the modern golden apple you think starts wars now, and what I'd take to throw it away.